The stone door groaned like a giant waking from a 1,000-year slumber. Using long iron levers they had brought from the Land Rover, Elias and Serafina put their full weight into it. At first, they were met with stubborn resistance. The seal had practically fused with the stone under the pressure of time and earth. But then came a millimeter of movement, followed by a creak, and finally, the protesting scrape of surfaces that had not touched each other for centuries. When the door was open by about half a meter, a draft of air seeped out. This was not the pure, damp, musty air of a cellar. This was an air that didn't breathe, that was not alive. It was abnormally cold and carried a sharp, metallic smell of ozone that burned the back of the throat. Elias recognized the scent from standing next to a high-voltage generator in a lab, the smell of raw, uncontrolled energy. This was proof that they weren't opening a tomb, but a sealed reactor, the only thing they saw when they peered through. The opening was an absolute devouring darkness. The faint hum they had felt on the surface had now become a low frequency, steady thrumming that emanated from the heart of the earth, a vibration they felt in their chests and in the roots of their teeth. "Are you ready?" Elias asked, surprised at how faint his own voice sounded. Serafina nodded, a look of both awe and determination on her face. "Not us," she said. "My ancestors have been ready for this moment for centuries." The preparation process was like a silent, methodical ritual. They fastened powerful LED headlamps to their foreheads and checked the batteries. They put on their climbing ropes and safety harnesses. They packed their backpacks with water, protein bars, first aid supplies, and most importantly, a copy of High Priest Licinus's diary. It was their last rational link to the known world. When Elias took his first step through the opening, he felt as if he were crossing into another dimension. The warm Thessalian sun and the sound of the wind vanished instantly. They were replaced by a claustrophobic world dominated by the cold stone and the sound of his own breath. Serafina followed him silently from behind. Before them, a spiral staircase carved directly from the bedrock descended into the darkness. The powerful beams of their headlamps cut sharp, ghostly cones through the gloom. And those lights revealed the secret of the walls. This was no natural cave. The walls were as smooth as if cut by a laser, their surfaces covered in an endlessly repeating pattern of serpent scales that the eye struggled to perceive. When the light hit them, the patterns seemed to shift for a moment, creating the illusion that the walls were breathing. The descent felt like it took hours. The spiral staircase, like a strand of DNA, wound its way down into the depths of the earth. They lost all points of reference to the outside world. The daylight filtering from above had long since disappeared. The only reality was the narrow stone steps illuminated by their headlamps, the hypnotic patterns on the walls, and the ominous rhythmic thrumming that filled the void within them. Elias was simultaneously taking geological measurements and battling the primal fear within him. The scientist in him wondered what kind of technology had been used to build this structure, but a deeper part of his soul whispered that this place was not designed for humans. Serafina, on the other hand, was in a state of complete calm. She was like an exile returning home. Her eyes scanned their surroundings not with the curiosity of a stranger, but with the familiarity of an owner. Finally, the stairs opened into a wide circular chamber. They had arrived at the first room of the labyrinth, the entrance hall. The room was about 20 meters in diameter, its ceiling lost in the darkness above. The air here was even thicker with the energy radiating from its center dot. In the very middle of the room stood a simple waist-high column of black granite. And on that column, unlike the broken monument on the surface, was a sculpture of 3 intertwined serpent heads, all of them intact. As Elias and Serafina approached the column, they noticed something strange. There were 3 identical tunnels leading out of the room, each opening into darkness. None had any sign, writing, or distinguishing feature. They didn't even want to think about the cost of choosing the wrong path. A few steps from the column, the eyes of the three serpent heads began to glow faintly. One pulsed with a pale blue light, another with green, and the third with a blood-red light. Seraphina stopped and whispered in admiration. The first trial of the Watchers. The triple choice. What's that? Elias asked. It is a test of intention. My ancestors say that in this labyrinth, the path is found not with the eyes, but with purpose, Seraphina said. Each tunnel represents a philosophy. The path of knowledge, the path of intuition, and the path of balance. The labyrinth tests you according to the path you choose. Elias felt an instinctual pull toward the serpent head glowing with blue light, representing knowledge. It was what he had sought his entire life. But Seraphina grabbed his arm. Be careful, Elias. Knowledge alone can be a trap. In searching for answers, you can forget the questions themselves. Intuition, on the other hand, is to walk blindly. It can also lead to a cliff. Our path must be the middle way between them, the path of balance. So how do we choose? Not just by walking, Seraphina said. By will. Elias walked toward the central serpent head, glowing with green light, which he assumed represented balance. He hesitated for a moment. Then, he reached out and touched the cold, smooth stone. The moment he touched it, the rhythm of the thrumming in the room changed. It shifted to a softer, more harmonic tone. The green light flared for an instant. And then, the entrance to the tunnel directly in front of them was illuminated with a soft, inviting green light, while the other two tunnels were plunged into pitch darkness. A low grinding sound was heard, as if an invisible door had opened. They had chosen their path. Meanwhile, in the camouflaged camp on the surface, Echo 2 adjusted his headphones. The sensitive seismic microphones had picked up the faint grinding sound from deep within the earth. Some kind of internal mechanism has been activated, he reported. Thermal tracking shows the targets are proceeding down the eastern corridor. In his office in Geneva, Magnus looked at the three-dimensional underground map of Callista that appeared on his screen. The map updated, illuminating the corridor Elias and Seraphina were walking down with a green line. He turned to his assistant. Isabella, prepare the geology team, he said, his voice as calm as ever. Thorn and his guide are clearing the way for us. Once they are past the primary obstacles, our team will go in and map the structure and its energy sources directly. I want them ready to move in 1 hour. The plan was working flawlessly. While Elias and Seraphina thought they were making a choice of their own free will, they were merely pawns moving along the path Magnus had drawn for them. And as the darkness of the labyrinth's first corridor swallowed them, they were still unaware of the trials that awaited. Contrary to its green-lit entrance, the path of balance plunged back into pitch-black darkness after just a few steps. Their only light sources now were the trembling white circles their headlamps cast on the stone floor before them. The corridor was claustrophobically straight and long. The serpent-scale patterns on the walls seemed to ripple at the edges of their light, as if they were alive, breathing in and out. The thrumming was no longer just a sound, but a constant presence that enveloped their entire beings, vibrating. In their internal organs, after walking for about 100 meters, they noticed a strangeness that broke the corridor's monotony. The air was shimmering faintly, like the haze rising from asphalt on a hot summer day. Elias stopped and looked at his shadow. For a moment, just a split second, his shadow seemed to lag behind his own movement. Seraphina, he whispered. The laws of physics... they're not stable here. This is a place where the rules of energy, not physics, apply, Elias, Seraphina replied, her voice echoing in the enclosed space. Chaos thins the fabric of reality. Don't trust your mind or your senses. Trust only your balance. They continued walking, and the corridor eventually opened into another wide, domed chamber. It was nearly identical to the entrance hall, with One difference: there were no exits. It was a dead end. The corridor they had come from stood behind them like a dark maw, but no other path was visible ahead. As they moved toward the center of the room, they noticed the air growing colder and the character of the thrumming changing. It was no longer just a low-frequency hum, but an incomprehensible chorus, as if thousands of people were whispering at once. Just as they reached the geometric center of the room, those whispers began to focus. First, meaningless syllables, then words, and finally, personal, venomous sentences that spoke to the deepest corners of each of their minds. This was the Chamber of Whispers, the first great trial of the labyrinth. For Elias, the whispers first took the voice of his academic failures, the condescending tone of the old professor on his doctoral committee. A rather creative theory, Dr. Thorne, but without proof. It's just a fairy tale. Then, the cold, bureaucratic voice of the committee that rejected his grant application. It has been decided that our resources should be allocated to more tangible projects. Then the whispers grew more cruel. He heard the disappointed voice of his deceased father. Archaeology? Son, when are you going to stop digging in the dirt and get a real job? But the worst, the most unbearable, was the voice of Professor Alistair Finch. This wasn't the warm, encouraging voice from the letter. This was a twisted, demonic version, feeding on Elias's greatest fears. You can't do it, Elias, see? It's too much for you. You'll fail just like I did. This valley will swallow you. Turn back, at least you'll have your dignity. And immediately after that voice came another, seductive whisper. Find the heart for yourself. Think of it. Elias, the greatest power in the world. You could end the energy crisis, cure diseases. You'd be a hero. A hero greater than Finch could ever have dreamed of being. Elias staggered for a moment. His head was spinning. Ambition and fear battled like two venomous snakes inside his brain. He pressed his hands to his ears, but the voices weren't coming from outside. They were coming from within. Seraphine's trial was different, but just as brutal. She heard the voices of her ancestors, the watchers who had protected this valley for generations. But these voices were not proud. They were accusatory. The last link, said one voice. The weakest link. Another voice added, You brought a stranger to the heart of our secrets. You have shamed the bones of our ancestors. The oldest, deepest voice delivered a verdict. Because of you, the balance will be lost forever. You are the shame of our line. You have failed, Seraphina. You have failed. Seraphina froze on the spot. Her face became as expressionless as a marble mask. The weight of 1,000-year-old duty crashed down on her shoulders like a mountain. This was her greatest fear, not being worthy. The room seemed to feed on their internal conflicts. The whispers grew louder, clearer. A psychological vortex was pulling them both down. But Seraphina carried the resilience of the Watchers in her blood. In her childhood, her grandmother had taught her how to defend against such mental assaults. She remembered that these whispers were not reality, but seeds of illusion planted in the mind by chaos. She took a deep breath and forced herself to untie the knot of fear and guilt in her mind. Elis, she shouted, her voice tearing through. The rooms hum. Don't listen to them. They aren't real. Elias looked at her in agony. They are echoes of your own mind. Seraphina continued. Chaos is using your greatest fears and your greatest desires against you. You are the one giving them power. Silence your mind. Remember what I taught you, the empty riverbed. Seraphina closed her eyes and began a monotonous rhythmic chant. In the language of the Watchers. It was an ancient technique that used the resonance of the sound, rather than the meaning of the words, to focus the mind and create a shield against external psychic noise. Elias clung to Seraphine's voice like a life raft. He closed his eyes. He tried to push aside the seductive promises of fame, the crushing fear of failure. It was incredibly difficult. The whispers knew his weakest points, but he began to repeat Seraphine's monotonous chant. He didn't understand the words, but the rhythm slowly calmed the chaotic storm in his mind. He imagined himself as a riverbed, through which water flowed but was not held, only allowed to pass. The whispers crashed against the shores of his mind, but flowed away without flooding it. Slowly, the power of the whispers diminished. First, the words devolved into meaningless syllables, and then back into the familiar low-frequency thrumming. The room fell silent again. The psychic pressure was lifted in an instant as they both gasped for breath. Exhausted, a low, grinding sound came from the opposite wall of the room. When they opened their eyes, they saw a section of the blank wall sliding silently aside, as if it had been waiting there for millennia, revealing a new, dark corridor. The dead end was an illusion. The path forward opened only to those who conquered the chaos within themselves. Elias looked at Seraphina as he tried to regulate his breathing. The respect he felt for her had now turned into admiration. Her myths and rituals were, in fact, highly advanced psychological defense mechanisms designed for survival in these inhuman environments. This trial had made them not just research partners, but comrades whose fates were intertwined. Seraphina met his gaze with a tired but determined smile. Without a word, they understood each other. They took a deep breath and stepped, shoulder to shoulder, into the new corridor that pulled them deeper into the labyrinth. They knew now that the trials to come would be far more challenging. The new corridor leading from the Chamber of Whispers was distinctly different from the previous one. It was narrower, and the floor sloped gently downward. The serpent scale patterns on the walls were now sharper and more defined. When the light from their headlamps struck them, they glistened as if wet. Strangest of all, the thrumming had been replaced by an almost absolute silence. This silence was even more unnerving than the psychic assault of the Chamber of Whispers. It was as if the entire structure was holding its breath, waiting for their next move. After a walk of about 15 minutes, the corridor opened into a massive, rectangular hall. The ceiling was so high that the beams of their headlamps couldn't reach the top. But the truly shocking thing was what covered the floor of the hall. Before them stretched a chasm, about 50 meters wide and of an unknown length in the darkness, appearing bottomless. The exit corridor on the other side stood like an almost unattainable goal at the far end of the void. "No," Elias whispered, taking a cautious step toward the edge of the chasm. The beam of his headlamp showed only a devouring darkness below. There was only one way to cross the chasm, a narrow stone bridge of single-piece black basalt, about a meter wide, hovering just a hand's breadth above the floor. But the bridge was not a straight path. Its surface was carved with a complex, interlocking geometric pattern. While the pattern possessed an aesthetic beauty, it was also a disorienting, dizzying, deceptive labyrinth. Some paths ended abruptly, others intersected at impossible angles. "The Weaver's Path," Seraphina said, her voice echoing in the hall. "The second trial of the Watchers. This is not just a bridge, Elias. This is a story. A map." Elias felt his analytical mind immediately kick in. "There must be a pattern," he said. "A logical sequence, a cipher." He approached the head of the bridge and began to study the pattern carefully. The thickness of the lines, the points of intersection, the repeating symbols. He took out his notebook and began to sketch the pattern roughly, trying to find a solution. After about 10 minutes, he believed he had developed a theory. "Okay," he said. "I think I've got it. Look, every 5 steps the main pattern repeats itself, just with a slight variation, if we take the right steps." He took his first step onto the stone block that was correct according to his theory. But as soon as his foot touched the stone, the entire bridge trembled slightly, and a deep, ominous groan came from beneath it. Elias instantly leaped back, his heart in his throat. "Wrong," Seraphina said, her voice calm but firm. You are thinking with your eyes, Elias. You are trying to solve it with your mind. My ancestors say there are some paths that are found more wisely by the feet than by the brain. Elias turned to her. What do you mean? This pattern is not a logic puzzle. It is a depiction of the Serpentina creation myth. The story of the journey from chaos to balance, Serafina said, beginning to take off her boots and socks. You can only walk this path by feeling the story, by dancing to its rhythm. Elias watched in horror as he realized what she was about to do. Serafina, barefoot, came to the head of the bridge. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she just breathed. Her body was completely still, like a dancer concentrating before a performance. Then, she took her first step. Her movement was completely different from Elias's calculated, hesitant step. It was fluid, instinctive, and precise. The stone block she stepped on made no sound. Then another step, and another. Serafina wasn't walking. She was gliding over the pattern, reading the invisible energy of the stone with the solace of her feet. Sometimes she turned right, sometimes left, sometimes she paused for a moment, then suddenly took a diagonal step. From the outside, these movements looked completely random and meaningless, but they contained a deep harmony. She wasn't walking on the bridge. She was walking with the bridge. Elias watched her, mesmerized. When Serafina reached the halfway point, Elias instinctively began to take off his own boots. He remembered his mentor's words, Seraphine's warnings. The mind was sometimes the greatest obstacle. Perhaps this time, what he needed to trust was not his brain, but his body. He went to the head of the bridge, barefoot. He closed his eyes and tried to imitate Serafina. At first he felt nothing, just cold, hard stone. But then, when he focused all his attention on the solace of his feet, he began to notice something. Each of the stones had a slightly different vibration. Some felt alive and inviting, while others felt dead and repellent. Hesitantly, he stepped onto the first stone. That felt alive. No vibration, no groan. He took a deep breath and searched for the next one. His feet, like antennae, were scanning for the right path. This was not a rational process. It was a matter of pure, intuitive trust. Slowly, he began to follow behind Serafina. When he silenced the complex calculations and fears in his mind, he realized how simple and clear the path actually was. The pattern was there not to deceive them, but to guide them. All it asked of them was to approach it with trust, not logic. When they reached the end of the bridge, the safe platform on the other side, they both wiped the sweat that was trickling down their foreheads. This was not physical fatigue, but mental exhaustion. How? How did you know? Elias asked, still out of breath. I didn't know, Serafina said, looking at the new dark corridor before them. I just trusted. The purpose of this labyrinth is not to kill us, Elias. It's to transform us. Each trial asks us to leave a part of ourselves behind. In the chamber of whispers, we left our fears. Here, we left our desire to control everything, our hubris. Elias looked at Serafina. The wisdom of this woman was the product of 1,000-year distillation. She was not just a guide. She was the living key to this labyrinth. Just then, a low rumbling sound came from the stone bridge behind them. When they turned, they saw the bridge slowly and silently detaching from the platform they had just left and retracting into the bottomless darkness below. The way back was now completely closed. They hadn't just passed the test. The test had locked the door behind them. Now there was only one direction, forward. Meanwhile, in his office in Geneva, Magnus Corbin saw the 2 green dots on his screen. The heat signatures of Elias and Serafina crossed the chasm. He then watched as the line representing the bridge was erased from the map. Interesting, he murmured to himself. The mechanism self-destructs after passage. An efficient security measure. Isabella Rossi entered the room. Mr. Corbin, the geology team is ready. They are awaiting your instructions." Magnus thought for a moment. His gaze was on the two small green dots on the map. "Not yet," he said. "Thorn and his guide are more capable than I anticipated. The labyrinth may have deeper defense mechanisms. We will wait for them to clear the path for us completely. Let them proceed to the final door to the heart. We will go only to collect the prize." That cold, calculating expression was on his face again. For him, this was a game of chess played with patience, and his pawns were advancing steadily toward the goal. Unlike the previous ones, the corridor beyond the Weaver's path climbed at a slight upward incline. The absolute silence in the air had vanished, replaced by a faint sound from the distance, reminiscent of trickling water. In the oppressive atmosphere of the deep underground, the sound was strangely comforting. It was like a whisper of hope. The corridor opened into a smaller, almost intimate room this time. Unlike the others, the room was not dark and threatening. It was illuminated by a silvery, soft light seeping from an invisible crack in the ceiling. This light illuminated a shallow circular pool in the center of the room, filled with water, as black and smooth as a mirror. The water sound they heard came from this pool. It was the sound of tiny rhythmic ripples created on the still surface by a single drop of water falling from the ceiling every second. The air in the room was clean and cool. There was no threatening energy. On the contrary, the place had a peaceful atmosphere, like a sanctuary. "What is this?" Elias asked, entering the room cautiously. "It's nothing like the others." Serafina paused as soon as she stepped into the room. She took a deep breath with her eyes closed. An expression, almost sorrowful, that he had never seen before crossed her face. "The pool of mirrors," she whispered. "The heart of the labyrinth, the final trial of the Watchers." "What kind of trial is this?" Elias said. "I don't see a trap. There's no riddle." "The most difficult trials are the ones that seem the simplest," Serafina said, fixing her eyes on the dark water of the pool. "This water shows you neither your face nor your future, Elias. Like a mirror, it reflects the deepest corners of your soul. It shows you your greatest, most secret desire, and your darkest, most repressed fear. And the only way forward is to look at both, to know both, and to accept both." Elias was unsettled by this idea. The Chamber of Whispers had brought out the monsters in the depths of his mind. Now the thought of his soul being reflected, naked, in this dark water terrified him even more. As if to give him courage, Serafina took the first step. She knelt at the edge of the pool. She bowed her head and looked into the water. Elias watched the emotions change across her face. First, an indescribable peace and happiness spread over her features. Her eyes shone. Elias understood that Serafina was seeing her greatest desire. She saw the valley healed, the column restored to its balance, the 1,000-year-old mission of the Watchers completed, and the land singing again. This was her life's purpose. But then, that happy expression froze in an instant. It was replaced by a look of deep pain and loss. Her brow furrowed, her lips trembled. Now she was seeing her greatest fear. She was all alone. As the last Watcher, she had failed in this difficult task. Betrayed by Elias or someone else, she was lost forever in the labyrinth. Having stained the legacy of her ancestors, Serafina seemed to falter for a moment as she faced both visions. But then she took a deep breath. She did not close her eyes. She continued to look at both fates reflected in the water. Finally, she whispered in a calm voice, "I am both. The hope of success and the fear of failure. I accept my path." The moment she said it, the water in the pool rippled slightly. And on the opposite wall of the room, a thin, vertical line of light appeared where there had been none before. The final door had begun to open. That it was Elias's turn. With his heart pounding, he knelt beside Serafina and hesitantly leaned over the water. The first thing he saw was a dizzying, breathtaking victory. It was his greatest desire. He saw himself at a podium in the massive conference hall of one of the world's most prestigious universities. The hall was filled with the world's most important scientists, historians, and academics. Everyone was looking at him with admiration. On the giant screen behind him, titles like the Callista Theory and the Thorne Paradigm flashed. He had not only saved his mentor's reputation, but had become a figure like Newton or Einstein, changing the course of human history. He was not just an explorer. He was a prophet. This vision was so real, so sweet, that Elias wanted to lose himself in it forever. But the image suddenly went dark, like a television channel changing. And it was replaced by an icy fear. His greatest, most primal fear. He was alone. But this was not an academic loneliness. He was an old man in the dusty ruins of Callista, his beard long, having lost his mind. His diary was filled with incomprehensible scribbles. He was talking to himself. Seraphina was gone. The world had forgotten him. He had not shared his mentor's fate. He had fallen to something far worse. He had not become a legend. He had died a madman. A nobody, rotting in an unmarked hole in the ground. Cared for by no one. This fear was so powerful that Elias wanted to physically pull back. But he felt Seraphine's hand on his shoulder. "Keep looking, Elias," she whispered. "That is also you. Don't run." Elias tried to control his trembling breath. He fixed his eyes on the two reflections in the water, the hero and the madman, the prophet and the nobody. Both were a part of him. One was the brightest manifestation of his hubris. The other, the darkest pit of his insecurity. They could not exist without each other. He swallowed hard and whispered, "I accept." The moment he said the word, the unbearable pressure inside him eased. The visions disappeared. The water once again became just a dark, still surface, the vertical line of light on the opposite wall had now become a full-sized door, completely open. From within came the familiar smell of raw energy they had felt when they opened the first door in the labyrinth. But this time, it was purer, more focused, and much more powerful. They had reached the end of the labyrinth. They were before the final door, the one that opened to the purification chamber, to the sacred and cursed place where the heart of the Ouroboros was imprisoned. They stood up. There was no turning back now. They had passed all the trials, faced the darkest corners of their souls. They looked at each other. No words were needed in that gaze. They had seen each other's fears and desires, witnessed each other's souls. The bond between them was now unbreakable. Together, they walked toward the final door. The hum coming from within was no longer just a sound, but a call. The end of a 1,000-year wait had come. And though they did not know what they would face, they were now ready. The peaceful atmosphere of the pool of mirrors was nothing but a dream they had left behind the final door. The moment they stepped inside, reality warped once again. This place was unlike any chamber or corridor they had seen before. They found themselves inside a massive natural subterranean dome. The cave's ceiling was covered in giant stalactites hanging like the wings of 1,000 bats, disappearing into the darkness above. But what truly defined the space were the crystalline veins that covered the walls and floor like a nervous system. These veins were not dead and cold. A living, pale purple and lilac light pulsed from within them. The entire cave felt like the inside of the rib cage of a colossal, geological being, breathing slowly and rhythmically. Here at its source, the familiar subterranean thrumming was no longer just a sound, but a tangible force that shook their entire bodies and vibrated the air. The sharp ozone smell of raw energy was so intense that even breathing required effort. In the very center of the cave, a wide, circular platform rose, made of obsidian as smooth as black volcanic glass. This was not an altar. It was the foundation of a complex machine. From the platform's surface, Interlocking metal rings and energy channels extended toward a central socket. Where the socket should have been, there was now a void, and from this void leaked the faint, unstable energy that was the source of the valley's thousand-year-old curse. The platform was separated from the world by a channel filled with a stagnant, pitch-black liquid of unknown origin. The purification chamber. Seraphina whispered, her voice a mere nothing against the vastness of the cave. Elias's eyes were locked on that central void. The heart of the Ouroboros, it should have been here. The high priest wrote that he hid it, Seraphina said, to protect it from the king's ambition. Their eyes began to scan the enormous living cave. Where were they to look? In a place so vast, how could they find one small object? Once again, Elias took refuge in his intellect and knowledge. As he examined the pulsing crystal veins on the walls, he noticed that the patterns were not entirely random. They had a specific rhythm, an order. He opened his laptop and brought up one of the sketches from High Priest Licinus's diary. It was a star chart showing the position of the stars on the day the column was broken. Seraphina, look, he said, turning the screen toward her. These crystal clusters on the walls. They're stars. This is a map of the sky. But why did he choose this particular day? Seraphina looked at Elias's screen, then at the walls of the cave. The accumulated wisdom of generations shone in her eyes. Because he was a watcher, Elias. For them, even the darkest moment is a sign. Licinus didn't hide the heart far away. He hid it in the shadow of the wound. They found the most prominent constellation from the star chart in its crystalline reflection on the cave wall. According to the chart, on that day, in the very heart of that constellation, there was a planet they called a bleeding star. They walked toward that point on the wall dot. As they approached, they noticed that the crystals in that area glowed more faintly, as if their energy was being drained. Elias reached his hand behind a loose-looking crystal formation. His fingers touched cold, smooth metal. The moment he felt the metal, a small panel opened, revealing a small lead-lined cavity behind it. The lead was there to shield the object inside from the suffocating chaos energy of the cave dot, and inside the cavity, resting on a soft bed of moss, was it, the heart of the Ouroboros dot. It was a complex sphere the size of a human heart, made of interlocking rings of different metals. Its surface had a mother-of-pearl-like sheen that changed color as it moved. When Elias slowly took it in his hand, he felt a warmth. Unlike the chaotic, irregular thrumming of the cave, a calm, steady, and powerful rhythm emanated from within the heart. It was alive. That moment, that instant of triumph and discovery, lasted only a second. The moment Elias lifted the heart from its cradle, a blinding white light erupted from different points in the cave. Powerful, modern projectors washed away the mystical purple glow of the cave, drowning every corner in a cruel, clinical whiteness. And then came the voice. A metallic, mocking voice, amplified by the cave's acoustics, echoed from every wall. Perfect. Simply perfect. Thank you, Dr. Thorne. You and your guide have performed your duties admirably. You may now hand over that precious artifact to more capable hands. Elias and Seraphina froze. From the entrance they had come through, and from crevices in the walls they hadn't noticed before, shadows materialized. It was Magnus's team, but this time it wasn't just two of them. There were dozens. They wore white hazmat suits designed to protect them from the energy in the cave. They held not only weapons, but also complex scanning devices and geological instruments. In an instant, they had fallen from a sanctuary into a laboratory, from a secret into a crime scene. They were completely surrounded, and then, from among the crowd walked Magnus Corbin. He wore no protective suit. Instead, he was dressed in a stylish dark-colored field outfit, and on his chest hung a shimmering device that created a slight distortion in the air around it. A personal energy shield. On his face was the calm, arrogant and utterly triumphant expression of a master whose chess pieces were all on the exact squares he wanted them to be. He walked directly toward Elias. His steps were as comfortable as if he were walking in his own home. His eyes were not on Elias or Seraphina. His entire being was locked on the pulsing, warm metal sphere Elias held in his hands, the heart of the Ouroboros. "How beautiful," Magnus said, his voice filled with admiration, a marvel of engineering thousands of years old, a legend made flesh. He stopped. He was now only a few steps from Elias. He finally tore his eyes from the heart and looked directly into Elias's eyes. "The game is over, Dr. Thorne," he said, without a trace of emotion in his voice. "Please, give me the heart." The only sounds in the cave were the calm, rhythmic beat of the heart and the chaotic, irregular thrum of the chamber. Two opposing forces, two different fates, had come face to face in that moment, in the heart of the cave, in the palm of a hand. And the game, far from being over, was just beginning. Magnus's command hung in the dense air of the cave. For a moment, time froze. Elias looked at the heart of the Ouroboros, beating calmly and rhythmically in his hands, then at the faceless men in white suits who surrounded them like a pack of predators. Escape was impossible. Resistance was futile. Logic dictated surrender, but Elias had been living beyond the limits of logic for weeks. What he held in his hands was not just an ancient artifact. It was a responsibility, a vow, a balance. "This doesn't belong to you, Magnus," Elias said, his voice surprisingly steady. On the contrary, it rang out with a calm resolve that defied the cave's thrumming. "It doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs here. It's a part of this valley, of this balance." Magnus gave a cynical laugh at this unexpected resistance. "Ah, Dr. Thorne, it seems Professor Finch's romanticism has rubbed off on you. Balance? What a primitive word. How passive. Balance is a boring moment in the universe where there is no change, where progress stops. Look at history. Was it balance that moved it forward? No. It was written by those who broke the balance, who rewrote the rules, who took the energy of chaos and bent it to their will." Magnus took another slow step toward them. The dangerous fire of a fanatic burned in his eyes. "I am not trying to destroy the world, Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice taking on a hypnotic tone. "I am editing it, curating it. History is a text, full of errors, diseases, wars, and pointless emotional outbursts. I am erasing the typos in that text. With this energy, I can end humanity's primitive, chaotic cycle. I can create a perfect, predictable world where logic, reason, and efficiency reign. You are a man of science. Can't you see the beauty of this ultimate engineering project?" Just as Elias was about to answer, Seraphina stepped forward. The light from her headlamp reflected off the shield on Magnus's chest, but Seraphine's eyes showed not the slightest sign of fear. "The world is not a machine to be fixed, stranger," Seraphina said, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 years of wisdom. "It is a song to be listened to. Its flaws, its pain, its chaos, they are all part of the music. You don't want to fix the world, you want to silence the song." These words were the last straw for Magnus. The false intellectual mask on his face fell away, replaced by pure, ice-cold impatience. "Enough philosophy," he hissed. "We are wasting time." He gave a short, sharp nod to his men. "Take it." The moment two men in white suits moved forward, Elias instinctively made his decision. Logic was dead. All that was left was a desperate act. In a move no one expected, he didn't run for the exit, but bolted toward the center of the cave, toward the empty socket where the heart of the Ouroboros belonged. His plan was insane, but it was his only chance. If he could place the heart in its socket, perhaps the mechanism would work, balance would be restored, and Magnus's plans would be ruined. For a moment, his move seemed to have surprised everyone. He had gained a few meters. He was about to reach the edge of the obsidian platform, but Magnus's men, even in their bulky suits, were incredibly fast. One of them skillfully tripped Elias. Losing his balance, Elias fell hard onto the crystalline floor. With the impact, the most precious treasure in his hands, the heart of the Ouroboros, slipped from his fingers and began to slide across the glistening floor. Everything happened in slow motion for an instant. The spinning, shimmering metal sphere. The hands reaching for it. Elias's, Seraphon's, Magnus single quotes S. But it was Magnus who won. With the advantage of the shield on his chest, he was more agile than the others. He dove to the ground, touching the heart just before it fell into the channel filled with the dark liquid. When he stood up, his face was illuminated with absolute triumph. He held the sphere aloft, like a king holding his scepter. "The game is over," he said again. But this time, his voice declared a final judgment. However, Magnus's plan was not what Elias had thought. He had no intention of placing the heart in the socket to restore balance. To him, that would be a waste of energy. He wanted the raw power. The unpurified, pure chaos. Had turned to his technicians. "Now," he commanded. Two technicians behind. The team turned a strange-looking device mounted on a tripod toward Magnus. A focused beam of energy shot from the end of the device, targeting the heart in Magnus's hand. This was Magnus's own technology, a sort of digital lockpick. Its purpose was to bypass the heart's ancient security systems and draw its power. Directly, skipping the purification mechanism, Magnus smiled, looking at the heart in his hand. "Let's see which is stronger, the wisdom of your ancestors or my will." And he activated the device. In that moment, everything in the cave screamed as Magnus's technology tried to force its way into the heart's systems. The heart triggered a defense mechanism. Its calm, rhythmic beats instantly ceased, replaced by an ear-splitting, high-frequency, furious shriek. The entire cave responded to the shriek. The pale purple light of the crystal veins on the walls suddenly turned a violent blood red and began to flash manically. The steady thrum from beneath the ground was now the sound of an earthquake, of a volcano erupting. And the faint energy, leaking from the central socket, now gushed out like a flood. A tsunami, the unpurified raw chaos energy, provoked by Magnus's technology, slammed directly into Magnus's body. The personal shield on his chest flickered for a moment against this overwhelming force, sizzled, and then went out with a spark. Like a blown fuse, Magnus was now defenseless. For the first time in millennia, that raw, wild, incomprehensible power from the creation of the universe made contact with a human body. The scream Magnus let out was not human. It contained both indescribable pain and a terrible ecstasy. This was the power he had dreamed of, yes, but it was like trying to pour an ocean into a teacup. His body began to twist and change under this power. Thin, red cracks, similar to those in the crystal veins, appeared on his skin. His eyes filled with pure, dark energy. His bones cracked audibly. He was not controlling chaos. Chaos was rewriting him, recreating him in its own image for its own purpose. Magnus's technicians and soldiers recoiled in terror. They watched in horror as their leader, instead of creating the perfect order he desired, transformed into a creature of pure chaos. Elias and Seraphina, huddled on the ground, witnessed this horrific transformation. The man who wanted to seize control had now completely lost it, surrendering his will to the most primal force in the universe. And the final, most terrifying trial in the heart of the labyrinth was just beginning. The inhuman scream Magnus let out gave way to the sound of cracking crystals and boiling energy. His body was no longer his own. He was no longer human. Chaos had created a vessel for itself, an avatar. Magnus's ambition and will had become the skeleton of this new entity. When the transformation was complete, The thing standing before them was a creature sprung from the deepest pit of nightmares. Standing over 2 meters tall, it was composed of cracking blood-red crystals and pure energy. It had a general silhouette resembling the human form, but the proportions were wrong. Its arms were disproportionately long and claw-like, and where its face should have been, only a swirling blind energy shone. The heart of the Ouroboros was completely fused into the creature's crystalline hand, serving as a kind of battery for it. A flawed and leaking power amplifier. Reason and logic were gone, replaced by a pure destructive instinct, and the first target of that instinct was those who had brought it into this state, its own men. After a moment's pause, the crystal monster turned toward the nearest technician in a white suit. The man tried to scramble back in terror, but it was too late. A whip of energy lashed out from the Magnus entity's hand, and the moment it struck the man, his body turned translucent for an instant, and then, like a glass statue, shattered into 1,000 pieces and crumbled to the floor. The others began to flee in panic, but there was nowhere to go in this enclosed space. The monster moved through the cave like a predator playing with its prey, destroying the team it had created with every move. Some were slammed against the walls by waves of energy, becoming lifeless stains. Others, like their leader, transformed into lifeless crystal statues with agonized screams. Within minutes, there was no one left alive in the cave but Elias and Serafina. The armed threat was gone, but it had been replaced by a much larger, much more incomprehensible one. "What do we do?" Elias shouted, huddled behind a crystal outcrop. "There has to be a way to stop it. There is only one way." Serafina answered. Her face was pale, but her eyes were determined. "We have to take the heart from it and put it back in the socket. We have to restore the balance. That's impossible. We can't even get close to it." "You don't have to get close," Serafina said. Her eyes locked on Elias's. "You won't get close. I will distract it. You will take the heart." "No." "Serafina, that's insane. It'll kill you." "Perhaps," Serafina said with a calm smile. "But the duty of a watcher is to sacrifice oneself for balance, if necessary. We have waited 1,000 years for this moment. I cannot run in fear now." Elias opened his mouth to object, but Serafina gave him no chance. She took a deep breath and stepped out from her cover. At the top of her lungs, she began to sing that ancient, rhythmic chant of the Watchers. Her voice shone like a beacon of hope in the chaotic noise of the cave. But she wasn't just chanting. She began to strike a large, resonant crystal vein protruding from a nearby wall rhythmically, with a small stone she held in her hand. It was not a random act. It was creating a dissonant harmony, a frequency opposite to that of chaos, one that disturbed it. Like rubbing a wet finger on the rim of a glass dot, it worked. The crystal monster immediately turned its full attention to Serafina. The vortex of energy where its face should have been rippled with rage. With a deafening roar, it began to advance toward Serafina with clumsy but unstoppable steps. This was Elias's chance. Using the few seconds of opportunity Serafina had created, he burst from his cover. His heart was beating like a war drum. The monster had its full attention on Serafina, lashing out at her with whips of energy. Serafina, with the agility of a mountain goat, dodged the attacks by leaping behind rocks at the last second. Elias circled around the monster from behind and approached it. The heat and energy radiating from its body were so intense that Elias's clothes felt like they were about to ignite. He reached the creature's crystalline hand where the heart was fused. He tried to pry the metal from the crystal claw, but it was impossible. They were integrated. In that moment, a detail from High Priest Lycinus's diary flashed into his mind. "The heart is more like a clock than a stone. Double quotes, it was a mechanism." He searched for the thin seam where the rings met. Tiny stitch he had noticed when he first held it. There it was. With all his strength, he pressed his thumb into that spot. A mechanical satisfying click was heard. The locking mechanism inside the heart of the Ouroboros had opened. The sphere, like a ripe fruit, fell from the monster's crystalline hand. Into Elias's waiting hands, the monster, suddenly disconnected from its power source, let out a roar of confusion and rage. It staggered for a moment. Elias did not waste that moment. Clutching the heart to his chest, he made the most important run of his life. He scrambled onto the obsidian platform. The raw energy gushing from the central socket tried to push him back like a storm, but he resisted. The last few steps were like walking through a swamp. The silence that followed the final deep thrum inside the cave was as dense as the chaos that had preceded it. This was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of completion, of fulfillment, and of peace. The sickly red glow that had filled the purification chamber was gone, replaced by a steady, soft, white light filtering from the crystal veins in the walls. The sharp smell of ozone in the air had given way to the clean scent of earth after a rain. The chaotic, irregular heart that had been beating ceaselessly for millennia had finally calmed. Elias remained motionless, for a while where he had collapsed on the obsidian platform. Every muscle burned with the agony of weeks of tension and the hell of the last few hours. His ears were still ringing with Magnus's final scream and the roar of the mechanism. When he closed his eyes, he saw visions of red crystals and swirling energy. Serafina approached him with slow, exhausted steps. Her face and arms were bruised, but her eyes were more alive and bright than ever before. Beneath the fatigue, one could read the indescribable lightness that comes from having a 1,000-year-old burden lifted from one's shoulders. She sat down next to Elias. They didn't say a single word to each other. They just sat and listened to the new, peaceful music of the cave, the calm, rhythmic beat of the heart. "It's over," Elias whispered after a while, as if afraid the spell would break if he spoke too loudly. "No," Serafina said, her voice soft. "It has just begun." They looked at the pile of black dust on the floor, the monument to ambition and hubris. That was once Magnus Corbin. Around them, the broken equipment and frozen crystal statues of his team stood as silent witnesses to modern man's disrespect for an ancient power. "What do we do with them?" Elias asked. "Nothing," Serafina said. "This is their tomb now. The earth will reclaim them all in time. They will be forgotten, just like King Lycomed's." They sat for a while longer with the weight of that decision. When they had gathered their strength, they stood up. It was time to go back. Their ascent from the labyrinth was a reflection, a negative of their descent. Each trial chamber was now a monument to their victory. When they reached the pool of mirrors, they looked into the water. There was no longer a hero or a madman there. Only the reflection of two tired people, their faces grimy, but their eyes shining with wisdom. The weaver's path was no longer a deceptive pattern, but a solid, reassuring bridge. They walked across it without hesitation. When they entered the Chamber of Whispers, they were met only by the echo of their own footsteps. The whispers were silenced forever. Each room was like the empty shell of the fears and weaknesses they had left behind. As they climbed the spiral staircase, they began to feel a faint light and smell the clean air from above. This gave them superhuman strength. When they pushed past the final steps and stepped out through the giant stone door, the world said hello to them again. It was a moment of rebirth, after the cold, sterile, and artificial world of the underground. The vitality of the surface was an assault on their senses. The first timid light of dawn was painting the valley in pink and orange. The scent of fresh thyme and wet earth, carried by the warm wind, filled their lungs. In the distance, the chirping of a bird was like the most beautiful symphony they had ever heard. Elias held his hand in the warmth of the sun hitting his face, as if testing the reality of this simple sensation. They looked at the valley. The change was not just something they felt, it was visible. The colors were more vibrant, more saturated. The oppressive, unsettling weight in the air was completely gone. A doe emerged from a nearby bush, paused for a moment to look at them, and then continued to graze calmly, without fear. Nature was no longer on the defensive. Elias took a small atmospheric sensor from his backpack. The device that had been measuring the wrongness in the valley for weeks now showed normal values. The strange, low-level energy radiation had completely zeroed out. Science was confirming what Seraphine's soul had felt. The valley had healed. They didn't leave right away that day. They returned to their campsite and fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep of their lives. When they woke up, the sun was high in the sky. They spent the rest of the day in a quiet routine, cleaning their wounds, packing their equipment. That night, they lit the campfire for the last time. The flames of the fire no longer cast threatening shadows, but served only as a friendly light that warmed their faces. "I was thinking about the report," Elias said, looking into the fire. The ethical dilemma in his mind had resurfaced. What will I tell the world? The scientific community will never forgive the cover-up of such a discovery. It goes against the very nature of science. Seraphina threw another branch into the fire. "What is the nature of science, Elias? Is it to know, or is it to understand?" She asked. "Your world sees knowledge as a power, a weapon, a possession. If they came to Callista, they wouldn't see balance or harmony here. They would see an unlimited energy source, a technology to be patented, a weapon to be controlled. Dozens more Magnuses would flock to this valley, and eventually one would succeed." Elias could not deny this bitter truth. Magnus was not an error in the system. He was the system itself, just a more honest version of it. True wisdom, Seraphina continued, is knowing which knowledge is worth sharing and which must be protected. Some secrets must be kept by the earth itself until humanity is ready for them. Your duty is no longer to reveal this secret to the world. It is to protect it from the world. These words erased the last shred of hesitation within Elias. He had made his decision. He would show the greatest respect for Professor Finch's legacy, not by shouting his theories to the world, but by protecting the sacred balance that he had understood. He had transitioned from an explorer to a watcher. The next morning, they packed their things for the last time. Elias picked up the Callista file. All the notes, the drawings, the dreams within, they were all now complete. Seraphina came to his side and handed him a smooth, ordinary river stone that fit in her palm. It wasn't the stone she had used for the ritual before entering the pool of mirrors, but it carried the same spirit. "Let this remind you not of power," she said, "but of balance." Elias took the stone. It was cool and heavy. He placed it inside the Callista file and closed the cover for the last time. As they got into the Land Rover, neither of them looked back. They watched the valley in the rearview mirror. With every turn, the Trident column grew smaller and finally disappeared over the horizon. As they left Callista, they carried with them neither treasure nor fame, only the weight of a secret and the lightness of a quiet victory. And behind them, they left a valley that had awakened from a 1,000-year slumber, breathing again, finding its music again. The rest of the world might not have been aware, but on that day, somewhere, a small balance had been restored. And sometimes, that was the greatest victory that could be won.